Rebalancing a crypto portfolio can make a huge difference, yet hardly anyone talks about it or the benefits it brings. In this video, I'll show you the numbers, the advantages, the risks, and one not-so-obvious benefit most people overlook. Let's get into it. We're going to use a simple portfolio as our example: Bitcoin, ETH, XRP, ADA, and Atom. These were Brian Young's picks from late 2023. I chose this one because honestly, anyone who spent just 2 hours researching crypto back then could have come up with a similar list. If you simply held this portfolio, it did pretty well, over 3x in USD terms. Against Bitcoin, it's slightly weaker, down about 10%. Now, what happens if we take the exact same portfolio and apply some rebalancing, but keeping the same weights? The simplest method is just to periodically reset it back to the original percentage allocations. In this case, I'll show you what happens if we rebalance every 6 months, starting January 2024 with the last rebalance in July 2025. The results in USD are significantly better. And remember, this takes zero brain power, just a fixed schedule. There's a reason why ETFs that use this exact approach end up outperforming most investors. It removes the psychological traps. Because what I've seen over and over, analyzing dozens of influencer portfolios, is that even experienced investors tend to chase what already pumped. The simple rebalancing strategy works the opposite way. Instead of adding more to the tokens that already gain the most, it takes profits from them and rotate into the underperformers within the portfolio. Keep in mind, when I say underperformers, I mean underperformers within the portfolio itself. And the portfolio, at least in my opinion, should always consist of the strongest coins available, since those tend to keep outperforming the broader market. Which exact coins to pick is a whole different topic. This strategy is more about taking advantage of the market as it shifts between risk-on and safety. In crypto, the market usually splits. Either Bitcoin outperforms or alts do. So rebalancing only makes sense if a big part of the portfolio is in Bitcoin or other relatively stable assets. If the portfolio is made up entirely of mid or small cap altcoins, rebalancing doesn't help much because they all move together anyway. But when you include Bitcoin, something from top 5 or top 10 in stables, that's where it can give an advantage. In risk-on periods, higher-risk alts outperform, so rebalancing automatically shifts some gains back into BTC, safer plays, or stables. When the correction hits and risky alts drop harder, the next rebalance moves funds back into them. Now let's take a look at a different type of rebalancing. The coins are the same, but this time Bitcoin starts with an 80% allocation and the rest get 5% each. For this example, I ran a simulation based on a scenario. After Trump won the elections, the portfolio shifts to take on more risk. That means rebalancing to 50% in Bitcoin and 12.5% each in the others. Then, on Trump's inauguration, risk is reduced again, and the portfolio goes back to the original weights with 80% in Bitcoin. This strategy requires patience, which is why it's hard for most people to execute. But look at the results: over 5x in USD terms and a clear outperformance against Bitcoin as well. The real challenge is catching these kinds of moves. In my experience, it doesn't take a genius to accumulate near the bottom if you have the patience. What's much harder is reducing risk closer to the top. This type of rebalancing can definitely lead to outperformance, but it all depends on the person executing it. I'm not advising anyone to try, because while the reward can be big, the risk of making the wrong call is just as real. Now let's try a different scenario. Say we bought at the March 2024 top, 80% in Bitcoin and 5% each into 4 gaming coins. Since then, Bitcoin has almost doubled, while the gaming coins are down 50–80% each. The portfolio as a whole is still up over 50%, thanks to the heavy Bitcoin allocation. But what if we tried rotating into gaming? Let's do the same as before, playing the election trade. Rebalancing to 50% in Bitcoin and 12.5% in each gaming coin, then selling back to safety on Inauguration Day. The result is actually worse than just holding 80% Bitcoin. That's because in this case, gaming coins had already topped in early December, and by Inauguration Day they had already lost a lot of value. But we couldn't have predicted that. Timing the exact top is nearly impossible. If we hadn't rotated out of gaming at all, the portfolio would only be break-even today. This shows that even with decent timing and a thesis that makes sense, you can still end up losing to Bitcoin if you pick the wrong coins. Even some strong alts would have been bad plays in this scenario. For example, Dog with Hat had a great run from August to December, but as an election play, it would have been terrible. Some coins run earlier, some later, and some never run at all. Let's talk stablecoins. If you've been in crypto for a while, you've probably heard influencers say you should always hold some stables for corrections. But does that actually work? To test it, let's go back to the first portfolio, but this time with the following weights: 50% Bitcoin, 30% USD, and 5% each for the rest. Now let's imagine we're perfect traders. No FOMO going into March 2024 since there wasn't any significant correction. We buy the exact bottom on August 5th and move all the stables into Bitcoin. Then we take profits on Inauguration Day, which turned out to be the top for BTC. Finally, we buy back at the April low around 77K. So what's the result of all this perfect buying and selling? Honestly, pretty disappointing. The performance ends up being very similar to Brian Young's original portfolio with simple holding, and actually worse than many of the rebalancing strategies we looked at earlier. Why is that the case? Well, during a bull market, almost everything goes up, and Bitcoin definitely does. So it's really hard to use stablecoin rotations to consistently outpace Bitcoin. Even though many people recommend keeping a stablecoin allocation in your portfolio, the numbers don't really support it. It's usually much better to stay positioned in Bitcoin throughout the cycle and only consider rotating between Bitcoin and alts. But that's a dangerous game on its own. Of course, at this point in the cycle, I personally wouldn't be buying Bitcoin, and that could turn out to be a mistake if we go much higher. But I was lucky enough to build my position during the bear market, so that's not an issue for me. Same goes for my other holdings. I'm happy with how I position myself. Now it's about preparing to take profits when the opportunities come. If I miss the exact top, my plan is to simply rotate into Bitcoin. What I mean by that is, let's say I sell 50% of my alts and then the market collapses. Here's something worth remembering. In 2021, when the bear market started, Bitcoin dominance was still around 40% in May 2022 and even dropped below 40% by September. So if something even remotely similar happens again, there should still be time to rotate into Bitcoin. We won't know for sure if the cycle is really over, but so far the 4-year cycle pattern holds. How I approach it depends on two things: how much I've already sold and how confident I am that the bear market has actually started. The more certain I am, the more I rotate into USD. But I'll always keep at least some Bitcoin exposure regardless. There's no guarantee the bear market will play out the same as before. Whatever happens, Bitcoin has the highest chance of surviving and thriving into the next cycle. That's all for today. See you in the next one, and remember, numbers don't lie.